morning, good afternoon, good evening. Just about a month ago, when Blessed Geza and four of his fellow war veterans, the five gringos, came out and denounced Emmerson Mnangagwa as corrupt, incompetent, and dismissed his claim that he should be allowed to stay in office until 2030 to deliver the so-called Vision 2030 as nonsense. They were speaking the truth that all of us knew. We knew it was nonsense that Emerson would deliver a Vision 2030, turn the country around from the failed state, sinking deeper and deeper into economic poverty, where already 500,000, half of the population was living in abject poverty and sinking deeper and deeper. He would turn that around and turn the country into an upper middle income nation in 5 years. That was just nonsense. And the truth is, we all knew it was nonsense. But we live in a country where few dare to speak the truth. What the five amigos did was no different from what the little boy said in the classical case of the empire has no clothes, in which the pompous emperor was walking naked. He would not admit he was naked. Those around him would not dare say he was naked. He had been conned by swindlers into believing that they were weaving an invisible piece of cloth which only those who are not fit to hold their office cannot see. And those who are stupid cannot see. So the emperor did not want it to be said that he was not fit to hold his office. And so he pretended he could see the gold cloth. And those around him did not dare to risk being called stupid. And so they too pretended they could see the cloth. It was only the little boy in the crowd who pointed out what they all could see. And so what the five amigos did is say something that all Zimbabweans knew. Ever since Mnangagwa took over in the military coup of 2017, he was so cocksure he would turn the economy around. He hit the ground running with his Zimbabwe is open for business mantra. And he was so sure that investors could flood into the country. investors did not flood into the country. They are a shrewd lot. They were not going to be easily conned by a lie. They could see that the coup was nothing more than musical chairs. In which some of the corrupt officials were removed from office and replaced with another lot. It is interesting to note here that the failure of Mnangagwa to revive the economy has given confidence to the G40, who are now coming out of the woodwork. And their message is very simple and clear. The failure to revive the economy, as far as they are concerned, is proof that the 2017 military coup booted out the angels in the Zanu PF administration and left the devil incarnate and his imps in charge. And now they're coming out of the woodwork to tell the nation that they are the angels, that they have the solution. And I think from now on, we are going to be bombarded by these G40 and their supporters, trying to convince us that they have got the answers to Zimbabwe's economic and political crisis. Here is a video of one of the G40 leaders coming out of the woodwork, keen as mustard to prove that they have the solutions.
I think that this nation can extricate itself from one being continuously in an election mode and two, to be forward-looking?
Well, electoral politics have failed in Zimbabwe, okay? I don't know why we continue to talk about GDP, 50 billion, sometimes 38 billion, and what if we can't count 5 million ballots. If you can't count 5 million ballots to the satisfaction of your citizenry, how do you count the 38 billion GDP? How do you compute it? So your template on holding elections must inspire confidence in everyone that at least you can count your fingers without missing some.
But you had confidence in it because you sat as chairperson of Mnangagwa's presidential bid.
Yeah.
Why were you trying to enter in it?
Well, there's a background to that, apparently. There was never an intention initially to challenge Emerson Mnangagwa in August 2023. If there was, I punctuated it with an outreach to the president. Okay, so I then said, Xavier, before we go this route of supporting your candidature, why don't we find ourselves together in one room with our own party so that we don't divide the vote? We push for things that we think are desirable for this grand old party, and that is reform, regeneration, okay, and a reset to our founding values. Let's approach the president, and we did so through President Becky. So when to see him, we said, no, it is not our desire to contest our party. It is our desire to see it reform and go to elections as a reformed entity that is all-inclusive and democratic in its conduct. Okay? And we expressed this in a letter that I drafted myself, a two-pager. Gave it to Mbeki. Mbeki said, no, I think we need to find somebody closer, much closer to your president than me. I probably sit in a different space now in terms of his ability to trust what I may bring on the table. So we agreed that we'd take that letter to Chisano, to President Chisano. So he took it, he passed it on. And it was all about reforming our country, reforming the party.
What do you say to people who don't believe in Zanu PF anymore and don't think that it can reform and they just want it out of office?
No. I think it's abdication to say 2-point-something million people who continuously vote for a president that they are unredeemable, and you want to wish them away from the politics of Zimbabwe. It's dreamy politics. They are as relevant as any other citizen.
I think I'll just stop it there. I think what we need to clarify here is that in Walter, we have got just another G40 leader who now wants to recast himself as a competent leader. The whole point of the 2017 military coup was a mistake in that it booted out the competent leaders like himself and Kasukuwere and left out the devil incarnate, Mugabe, Mnangagwa, sorry, and those around him. This is just bullshit, to use Gesa's language. The truth of the matter is, all of them, Mzembi, Kasukuwere, Mnangagwa, Mujuru, all of them were in Zanu PF from the word go in 1980. Mugabe corrupted them. Mugabe was good at corrupting those around him so that they became faithful to him and not to the nation. This was beautifully explained by Dr. Simbamakoni when he explained it, what had happened to Zimbabwe soon after independence, what Mugabe was doing, the operative, the control freak he was.
I recall very clearly that when we came into office in 1980, we inherited Ian Smith's systems. And Ian Smith's ministers drove Peugeot 504s. They drove themselves from home to work in their Land Rovers and all in kinds. Most of them were farmers. They parked their Land Rover and then they used the government vehicle when they were at work with a chauffeur. When they finished at night, they packed them and they took theirs to go home. Within the month of our coming into office, Prime Minister Mugabe then directed that every minister be issued with an E-class Mercedes-Benz. And the Peugeot 504s were retired to permanent secretaries. and the deputy ministers who then took over. We can also look at many other things, small they may appear at the time. Let me hazard that even at that point, Enos Nkala was our Minister of Finance. I don't think we knew what budget we inherited from Ian Smith when the decision was taken to buy those E-class fleets for the ministers. So the material, affection for material things has always been with us. And the differentiation also, even going back into the camps, Zemashefu, Neze, my comrades, Makada, were not the same. So much so that even today, when the so-called Minister for Presidential Affairs or Provincial Governor, as they were, goes to Bubi or Binga, they will be served separately and differently from the other people. The avarice grew as we began to exploit the opportunities of office. When I was in the government, the minister was allocated one vehicle that they kept, which was the sedan they used in town. If you needed to go off-road, then your ministry hired off-road vehicles from the CMED, and you were charged for it. Now a minister will have an average of 4 vehicles in his forecourt, all at government's expense.
So the leadership modeled the wrong kind of behavior, and that kind of behavior permeated all across our society. Our CEOs, like you're saying, heads of parastatals and so forth, modeled from the top.
Indeed. Indeed. I made it.
I'll stop it there. I think it is important to understand what Mugabe was doing here. He was bribing all those leaders around him with his E-class Mercedes-Benz, the trappings of high office, so that they became faithful to him. You bribe these high-ranking officials, and they'll do whatever you like. That principle has run through the Zanu PF administrations one after another, including this Mnangagwa administration. He bribed the judges, the ministers, the deputy ministers, the MPs, the senators, the run-up to the 2023 elections. And as our friend here rightly admitted, that come the elections, the nation found itself in a surprising situation where it could not count 5 million votes. The number, at least the presidential vote, kept creeping up to get him over the line. In the 2018 elections, when the results were challenged in the Constitutional Court, the lawyer of Chamisa admitted, challenged, that there were 16 polling stations where the vote of the president, Mnangagwa, in polling station A would be exactly the same as in polling station B. That of Chamisa would also be exactly the same in A and B. the number of spoiled votes, etc., will be exactly the same. And there were 16 such cases. And in all those 16 cases, the one common denominator was that Emmerson Mnangagwa was doing very well indeed. And what worried everybody, what everybody should have seen immediately, is here is a case where this polling station A, where Mnangagwa is doing well, has been re-entered to increase Mnangagwa's vote, to get him over the line. And then another station, polling station was seen, polling station C, and Mnangagwa is doing well. And those figures were entered once and entered again. There was nothing mysterious about these polling stations. It was clear this was just a double entry. They had to get Mnangagwa over the crossing line. So what do? The V11 of those stations where Mnangagwa is doing well are entered more than once. And the proof of that would have been very simple. They should have asked to open the ballot boxes of those 16 polling stations. Because while they could enter the V11 figures on the tally twice, they could not reproduce the ballot boxes. They could not reproduce another polling station complete within its own sealed ballot box. So the logical thing would have been, let's go and open the ballot boxes of all those 16 polling stations. And guess who refused to have the ballot boxes opened? It was none other than Chamisa's lawyer. Clear proof that we have got here a completely corrupted political system. And in this particular case, why the opposition was so corrupt is simple enough. Mugabe had used the same dirty trick when the GNU was formed. Mugabe trapped the MDC leaders, Morgan Tsvangirai, with the same E-class Mercedes-Benz, generous salaries and allowances, just the same way as he had entrapped his own Zanu PF leaders. For the sake of completeness, I would like you to listen to the video clip of the Constitutional Court challenge of the 2018 election results, particularly the issue of the 16 polling station results that are identical.
Zimbabwe, they've now held their recent elections, which went well.
International monitors had to force their way through angry crowds to deliver their verdict. They reported serious flaws in the process. It was not a level playing field. Many injured and 3 dead. The opposition says the shootings and the beatings cannot be justified. And an election in which Zimbabwe dared to dream has instead brought back its worst nightmares. There were running battles through the city centre and the streets echoed to the sound of gunfire.
Zimbabwe, they've now held their recent elections, which went well.
You are ready now to start. I am ready. You may start.
Thank you, my lord. What ZEC has done is to violate the constitution, to violate the Electoral Act in a manner which has ultimately benefited the first respondent. National and Central, page 159, the report by the ZBC, it does 2 things. Number 1, it mentions figures. Number 2, it attributes those figures to a ZEC official. It says by 5:30 p.m., 105,000 people had voted in National and Central. The final figure that one gets from ZEC is that an hour and 30 minutes later, plus 370,000 people voted. Is it humanly possible? But it doesn't end there. Then there is the issue of identical polling results. There are at least 16 polling stations with identical results. Identical results for Chamisa, identical results for Mnangagwa, identical spoiled votes. And in all those places, Mnangagwa not only wins, but wins big. It's like a kid was playing with the figures. That, with respect, is not how an election is conducted.
We'll now give the opportunity to Mr. Kanengoni.
The Zimbabwe Electoral Commission cannot be taken to task to say, why is the voter turnout in my central at this particular level and not at that particular level? Voters behave the way they do. No one knows why. Maybe behavioral scientists may be able to answer the question if they study it.
Mr. Kanengoni, there's the averment that several polling stations showed identical results.
And the simple point we make is that there's no need to be theoretical about it. We have the returns. This is something that happened. We show you the returns. And we've put the returns for 2 of those polling stations here to illustrate the point.
You say it happened?
Yes.
But in his presentation, Pofo says it's actually 16 polling stations where there are identical results. You heard it?
Yes, we did. Even in the affidavit, they put a bit more of the polling stations there. But we chose this to illustrate to the court. But for the rest, it did happen. It did actually occur.
We'll now go back to the applicant. Why go for speculative conclusions of manipulation?
The point that I wish to make is that this is evidence of manipulation by ZEC after the process. Now, if you go to what they call the primary data, you're going to see manipulated data. So the applicant cannot ask a court to open residue which has already been manipulated. If you go to the residue, you drink from a poisoned well. When you look at the figures, let's look at those that have been admitted by ZEC. Let's look at the parliamentary tally. When we show that 40,000 people are said to have voted in the presidential election and not in the primary election, and ZEC does not have returns which show that there were people who simply chose to vote in the presidential election, that is the end.
Stop it there. What is clear here is the applicant, Chamisa's lawyer, knew that if he had called and they'd taken up suggestion to open the ballot boxes, they would have found that those additional ballot boxes with duplicate entries do not exist. These were just double entries. You cannot replicate a polling station complete with the returning officers, the representative from all the other parties, etc., etc. They could not have done it. And he knew they could not do it. And it is the applicant, the opposition, who say, no, we don't want to open it. We don't want to hear about that ballot box. Strange indeed. The judge, in the interest of the truth, would have said, okay, we as the court, we want to see those ballot boxes. Bring them here, let's open them. But in a country where the judges are paid and paid well to turn a blind eye, it is no surprise at all that the judge decided to turn a blind eye to the obvious. To come back to our story today, we have our friend here. He has had the chance, or rather, he is now taking advantage of the reality on the ground. The reality that Mnangagwa and company have failed to revive the economy. To present himself as squeaky clean, Zanu PF leader was booted out at the end of the 2017 military coup, now ready to come and play his part in reforming the country and taking it forward. I know we are going to see and hear a lot from people like him. The truth of the matter is, he was just as actively involved in creating this Zanu PF de facto one-party state and imposing it on the nation. He was in the GNU just as his colleague he was talking about there, Kasukwere, 2008 to 2013. He worked with Zanu PF. Zanu PF was not going to reform itself out of office. And when Mugabe bribed Morgan Tsvangirai and company to forget about the reforms, he as much as anybody else in Zanu PF, were happy that not even a token reform was implemented in 5 years of the GNU. He and Kasukuwere, the G40s, are now fighting for Mnangagwa to step down. I think they will be trying their best to entice the people to believe that Chiwenga will bring about democratic reforms to take the nation forward. I dispute that. And I think people should not be so easily conned into believing that nonsense. One of the Zanu PF leaders, Magaret Dongo, once called the Zanu PF MPs, ministers, and party leaders, vakadzi vaMugabe, because of the way they always groveled to Mugabe. Even at the height of the outrageous events, national events, like the 1983 to 1987 Kukura-Wondi, the blatant electoral rig of 2008, and the military coup of 2017 itself, although in this case here, it divided the party. Nonetheless, those who were still in the party said nothing. They didn't see anything wrong. Indeed, some of the G40 individuals who, although they were not, they supported G40, their positions were not clearly defined. So when they realized that the G40 faction had lost, they changed their allegiance. And no doubt, with this increased pressure from Mnangagwa to go, they will switch back to G40. Indeed, some of the people in the G40 are coming out right and supporting the Chiwenga candidature. Zanu PF leaders have always been corrupt and incredible opportunists. They would do anything to secure power for themselves. Walter is trying to argue that he has got the solution to take the nation forward. Reform, he says. I'll just play the rest of this video clip before I make my own concluding remarks.
Now, if
Blessed
Geza
Geza said the people in Zanu PF lack principles. They clip whoever is at the helm or holds power.
For me, who is a rebranding specialist, a reformer. They are candidates for reform. So we want to change that behavior. If there is such behavior, it must be changed to the citizens that we want them to be, to the cadres that we want them to be. But we can't wish them away. We can't wish away 2.5 million people that continuously vote for you. And they say, no, because
probably
they come
it's not wishing away. Probably it's just removing them from power for a moment.
No.
So that they can reflect without being drunk in power.
I think there's a terrible wish factor in our politics.
Yes.
Yeah. There's always a wish factor. So people, for example, sit here and wish for a coup. Okay? There's a whole class of people in our country who sit down and wish for a coup.
Do you think it will happen?
No. That's what I'm saying. There is a whole class of people who would wish for that. There's a whole class of people who would also wish that Emerson wakes up one morning and say, I'm tired. I'm handing over to so-and-so, okay, or to my deputy. There's also another constituency that wishes in that direction. There's also another constituency that thinks that the president must wake up one morning and say, I'm handing over to Nelson Chamisa because he contested me in disputed elections in 2018, 2023, part of a due regeneration, I hand over to him. There's a whole class of people, a whole constituency that believes that we must pronounce a national transitional authority composed of neutrals to run government leading to fresh, free and fair elections. All those things sit in the realm of wish lists until we inculcate a culture amongst ourselves to sit down and then discuss all these wishes, and then we'll distill what is practical.
We are being encouraged here to sit down with the likes of him and distill what is real and what is just wishful thinking. I think the main problem we have always had in Zimbabwe is we have had people like him who believe that Zanu PF has a divine right to rule. And they've created a political system in which those in the army, in the police, in the CIO, and all the other important sectors of society have been brainwashed into believing that their number one allegiance is to Zanu PF, is to maintaining Zanu PF in power, is to resist regime change by all means. We should not be fooled into believing that this G40 who now want to pretend that they are squeaky clean. The few years in exile have made them reflect, and now they are willing to come back to Zimbabwe and change Zimbabwe and reform Zimbabwe so that it will become a healthy and functioning democratic country. All they are trying to do is get back into power. People of Zimbabwe must reject that. The fundamental value that we must accept is that every Zimbabwean has a right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country. Zanu PF rejected that in 1980. The elections of 1980 were not free, fair, and credible because Zanu PF made it very clear that if the party does not win, the Bush war would continue. The people voted to end the Bush war. And when Zanu PF got into power, Mugabe set out to create the de facto one-party state that has ruled the country to this day. What is happening now is a consequence of decades of Zanu PF tyrannical misrule, corruption, and mismanagement. Now we have said the emperor is naked. Zanu PF is corrupt. We have got to accept that we cannot allow the same Zanu PF to play a pivotal role in what happens next. Walter Mzembi, Xavier Kasukuwere, Constantino Chiwenga, and all these other people want to claim that since we are the one who say the emperor is naked, that Zanu PF has failed, we must be the ones who say what happens next. No. They are as much part and parcel of the failed Zanu PF dictatorship. And therefore, then they cannot play a part. Just as much as our current opposition parties, MDC, CCC, they cannot play a part because they had the opportunity to implement the reforms, golden opportunity in 2008 to 2013. They were bribed by Mugabe and then now Mnangagwa to play along. What we need is for SADC to step in the breach and come up with a government of national unity in which neither Zanu PF nor MDC CCC can play a part. This very idea that 2.5 million people voted for Zanu PF is nonsense. Mzembi himself is the one who admitted that our electoral system cannot count 5 million votes. And as I showed you in that video clip, when we count the votes for the president, the number mysteriously, in fact, it's not mysterious at all, is deliberately increased to secure him victory by re-entering returns from the same polling station. There were 8 polling stations in that video clip with the V11s and sealed ballot boxes. The double re-entry of the same V11 does not create a polling station. Chamisa went along, so did the Constitutional Court judges, because they too are in Zanu PF's pocket. We are not going to accept a situation where we keep going round and round in this madness. We want real change. And we cannot be so foolish as to believe that a recycled Walter Mzembi, Xavier Kasukuwere, Constantino Chiwenga can be the answer to the nation's problems. Think about it. Thank you very much. Have a good day.